Welcome to Who Cares, a podcast by SEIU 2015. We are the largest union of long-term care workers across the country. This is episode number 1. Our podcast will host long-form conversations on the issues important to care workers and care recipients. As the aging population continues to grow, the issues around long-term care will become critical to our local, to our state, and national priorities. I'm Arnulfo De La Cruz, the president of SEIU 2015, and now the host of Who Cares. I'm excited to explore these important topics with our guests and shine a light on the critical issues our care workers face. In the lead up to the 2024 election, our podcast will be examining the intersection of politics and long-term care. We feel it's important that we get out and vote this November because elections, as we know, have consequences. It's also important that we vote for candidates that are committed to the issues that our members care about, to unions and organized labor in general, and also to our justice agenda. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by a candidate who has been a partner of SEIU and a champion for our issues, particularly in Fresno County Supervisor candidate Luis Chavez. Luis, welcome to Who Cares.
Thank you so much, Arnulfo, for the invitation. And it's great to know that we are the very first podcast that we'll be doing for our SEIU brothers and sisters.
That's great. And Luis, I know obviously you grew up in the Fresno area. What about the area made you want to stay and serve the community through public service where you grew up?
Well, I think for me, it's really the people. I grew up in the southeast part of Fresno, and when you look at the aerial shot of that, it's where a lot of the food processing plants are concentrated. We have a number of, packing houses here in the neighborhood that I grew up around. My mother actually worked in the field. She worked in packing houses. And then I'm proud to say that my mom was actually a home care worker as well. So this is something that's very near and dear to me, to talk about these issues and challenges that we have in our community. But I think for the most part, I think for me, it's the people. I love just living in a neighborhood where the diversity is just like this beautiful mosaic of communities. We have a large, obviously, Latino population. We have the second largest African-American population in the district that I currently represent. And then we have a large Southeast Asian population. And we know that all of our communities is what makes our strength. So for me, that was a no-brainer. I went to college here locally, Fresno State University, went to undergrad and then grad school, and decided to stay in my community and try to make a difference. And I wasn't always involved in politics, but I started off as a teacher working in a lot of the underserved communities, and then went on to work for federally qualified health centers. So I ran programs specifically for our farm worker communities that we often know that in the rural communities, it's hard to get medical services. It's hard to get in-home care. And so that's really, to me, the space that I love to work in, the people, the communities. And I'm really enjoying what I'm doing right now. And that's why we're working so hard to make sure that, we have a voice on that board of supervisors that can advocate for our community.
That's really great, Luis. And I know we were talking a little bit earlier before we got started. For those listening, my father and my grandmother were from Fresno, were heavily involved in the United Farm Workers Union in the early days. And a lot of friends or family who were born and raised in Fresno, some of them leave. They go to look for opportunities in the Bay Area or Los Angeles and Southern California. And I think historically, those opportunities to advance in the Central Valley and Fresno in particular have not been easy. So we're so excited to have someone like you running for public office and serving the community and saying, I'm hunkering down, I'm staying where I'm from, and I'm committed to helping to make positive change. So that's really exciting. Now, Luis, you've also been serving on the city council. I know that there's differences between what the city council works on and the board of supervisors. Could you talk a little bit about what motivated you to run for county supervisor, and what are some of the priorities that you hope to address on the board next year and moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, was something that was very, humbling and really a big, I would say awakening was the pandemic and the effect that had on our community. The zip codes that we currently represent right now were actually deemed the national COVID hotspot during the middle of the pandemic, which meant that people here got sick and died at a higher rate, than other places across our nation. And so when you see that type of challenge and, the suffering that I got a chance to see, especially from people that we deemed essential during the time, right? We had farm workers. We had people that were working in the packing houses that I mentioned earlier that were not receiving the proper care that they need. We're not receiving the proper PPE and safety equipment that they needed to stay healthy and keep their families healthy. And so the supervisor that's currently there, I mean, was not visible at all. And so I have emails saved of inviting them to certain events, and that just wasn't happening. And so for me, I really felt strongly that we needed somebody that would be out there working and providing these vital services for our community. And so, at the encouragement of a lot of our local folks, a lot of elected leaders and community leaders and people that I worked with during the pandemic, I decided to run for supervisor. And, we've been working for about a year and a half now, going door to door, getting support. The old fashioned way, grassroots campaigning. But it feels really good now to have our SEIU brothers and sisters with us right alongside canvassing. I feel really good about the election. I'm confident we're going to win in November 5th, but it's because of the work that we've been doing on there. But that's really, for me, my motivation. I think the pandemic opened the eyes of not just myself, but a lot of the people that I work with in our neighborhoods, that it's so important to have people in there that are going to be advocating and fighting for taking care of the most vulnerable, right? We have a lot of senior citizens that make up the population in our community, and those are really the folks that need the most services. They need the most, help with medication, help with getting their groceries. And so that to me is really what the work is about. It's about serving people, and we're going to continue to do that.
We really appreciate you sharing that. Luis, I often have mentioned to our caregiver union members, kind of in reflecting on the struggle of farm workers, right? Given the power of agribusiness in the Central Valley, which really is the breadbasket of the entire world. It has been for so many decades. And, farm workers, like caregivers, were kind of left out of this basic American contract that said, in pursuing the American dream, you could have a living wage, you could have retirement and good benefits. And it seemed like in those early days when farm workers were organizing in the Central Valley, they almost had to move mountains. They ended up taking that struggle not just to the fields of California, but to across the world to try to encourage agribusiness to sit down and treat workers fairly. And really, it was a social movement that was built out of that to even get them to budge. And similarly, caregivers kind of left out of that equation as well, right? Caregivers have no retirement. They're not county employees. They're not city employees. It's been incredibly difficult in Fresno in particular for our caregivers to be able to negotiate a contract that they can be proud of, that respects their dignity, that you so eloquently talked about the value that a caregiver brings to their loved ones, to people who are in need, to seniors, to children with disabilities. Nevertheless, we've had to do civil disobedience and get arrested and, go to the Board of Supervisors every single week. And these are folks who are up there in age. They're going with their consumers. And you've really been a champion on this issue. I think the way that you talk about the role of a caregiver in society, the role of a caregiver in Fresno is really important to you. Could you speak a little bit more? Why is this issue of care so important for you?
Well, I think, earlier I said, my mom was a home care worker, and I remember, her telling us the stories of the difficulties of having to work, and making sure that people took their medication on time. Otherwise, they would have another medical emergency that they would have to deal with, or having to, help somebody bathe or feed them, take them to their appointments, transport them. And I think that's really the challenge, that a lot of regular people don't really understand what the job description is of a home care worker, because at the end of the day, that the home care workers go to somebody's home and they close the door and they don't see, right, like the work that needs to happen within that home. But I got to tell you this, I represent one of the largest senior citizen complexes in the city of Fresno, here in Southeast. And that was like the number one issue that we were trying to deal with, during the pandemic. And then even after the pandemic, I think that problem became more stark, because now you had senior citizens that, didn't have anybody to help them with their services, with their, daily needs that they have. And so to me, that's something very, very important, because you have to take care of the most vulnerable in our community. And if you don't do that, what happens is it actually ends up costing the county more money to have people that now have to move to a retirement home or have to move to a convalescent home, where we know that, the price tag for those places is oftentimes in the thousands per week. So to me, this is really a no-brainer, an investment, and it's been really frustrating to see this current board of supervisors just completely neglect that. And I think more than anything, not just neglected, but people that go there and speak on this, our home care workers, to be arrested, like you mentioned, or to be, disrespected in that way where they're not even allowed to speak and voice their constitutional right to address their government. I think that needs to change, and that's going to change when we get there and we have that voice, because that's going to be one of the first things that I want to focus on is social services on the board of supervisors. And we're going to keep working towards that because it's important. Those are the issues that to me motivate me to want to work even harder, right? When you take care of senior citizens that right now, by the way, are facing a lot of hardship, right? We have utilities that have gone up. We have rent that has gone up. We have basic, food and necessities that has gone up. I know for a fact that there are seniors that are struggling right now out there. And the only thing, that the recourse that they have, is that they have that in-home care and support service to keep them independent and keep them at least living in their own home so that they don't have to abandon the neighborhoods that they grew up in. And so that to me is very important. And I think for many, many years, we have not made that a priority here in Fresno County, and we need to do that. Part of the work that I also do on Arnulfo is I also sit on the Fresno Madera Agency on Aging. And so I see it on a monthly basis. I get reports of what our senior population out there is going through. So all of these hardships that I mentioned, we see that in the survey that we do for them. That's why it's so important that we have programs like the Hot Meal program, the Senior Meals on Wheels program that help them and provide them a little bit of relief. But we shouldn't have senior citizens. That go without care. And last year, as you're familiar, I wrote an op-ed that got published in our local Fresno Bee. There were over 600,000 hours that did not get used. And I know for a fact, as a board member for Fresno Madera Agency on Aging, how big that need is. And to me, that's a testament of how the lack of investment is now costing people their health and ultimately their lives.
It's funny you mentioned that. That op-ed that you did has been kind of spreading like wildfire among the caregiver community. I think our members were so excited to see you pin that. And I imagine that the reason why the Fresno Bee publishes because they recognize the significance of the issue that you're addressing. So it was really, powerful to see you pen that op-ed. It's funny that you mentioned kind of the value of a caregiver, the needs of seniors. The IHSS program really was invented to actually save counties in the state of California. It was a pretty novel idea when it first started, but the idea that a senior who's not able to get the care that they need in their home, or a child with or someone with a severe disability, I think the reason why this infrastructure exists was because if they don't receive that, they're oftentimes having to go to urgent care or the emergency room to address their needs, which ends up costing the county and taxpayers in general much more in terms of resources than having a caregiver, make a visit on someone to make sure that their nutritional needs are being met, that their medicine is, accurate, and really lending a hand to them to allow them to get by. So I'm really glad that you're, talking about these issues on the campaign trail. The other thing I was just curious about, Fresno, with all of its challenges, it's also vibrant in the sense that it's growing so quickly. I think the last time I looked, it was kind of like the Central Valley and the Inland Empire continue to be the two fastest growing parts of California. How do you envision the county balancing, on the one end, economic development with the need to preserve a lot of these issues that you said, affordable housing, especially for low-income residents, seniors, and essential workers, and then also have, on the other hand, I know that there's a lot of new developments in the county, and it's continuing to explode in terms of growth. How do you envision kind of balancing those two, opportunity, but also the challenges that, Fresnoans and folks in the county are facing on a daily basis, as you so eloquently mentioned?
Yeah, you're 100% right, Arnulfo. The fastest growing part of our population here have been the senior citizen population. And now we should talk about the baby boomers, but now it's the generations right behind them that are getting up there in age. And I represent a part of the city that experienced the most growth. I would say an explosion of growth. And statistically speaking, the city of Fresno grew by about 50,000 people. 42% of that additional 50,000 is concentrated in the area that I currently represent. So I see a lot of those challenges that you reference where now you're having, neighborhoods that the rent has gone up significantly, or even the cost of living for, utility rates has like doubled and tripled. And so when we look at that dynamic that has occurred as a result of the population, you have to really analyze and self-reflect on what your priorities are as a county with regards to the investments that you're making in a lot of the safety net programs. And that's where I really see, social services coming into place. As we know, the county is 100% responsible for social services in the area, in the county here. And that hasn't happened. And as a result, as a council member, we've had to actually step up and fill some of those gaps. And I'll give you some quick examples. During the pandemic, I was a council member that actually organized the very first COVID drive-through test here in South Fresno. We had over 2,000 people that came. The county didn't do anything. They were pretending like nothing was going on. I knew for a fact that farm workers that did not have any kind of health insurance or medical coverage were going to suffer the most. So we actually made some investments from the ARPA funding that we got to the tune of about $2 million to make sure that farm workers were able to get medical services. And so when you look at that dynamic for the Fresno County, that to me is really how we're going to address a lot of the challenges that you mentioned, because the population is going to keep growing. We're going to have more folks that are aging. And that was like one of the number one issues identified in a survey of over 4,000 senior citizens that we did as an agency for the Fresno Madera Agency on Aging, where that was a number one concern. It's how do we actually have seniors that are able to stay independent and living in their own homes and also get the care that they receive, right? A lot of seniors have asthma rates that here in the Central Valley, as you know, are exorbitantly high. They have high blood pressure, diabetes, they have respiratory problems. Some of them have disabilities as well. Those safety net programs to me are really what's going to guide a lot of what the services that we provide for our aging population. It's not going to stop. We know that by our own data, it shows us that senior citizens are going to keep having that need of living independently in their home, but also receiving that care and service that they need, right? We have a lot of our seniors that have, pre-existing conditions like diabetes, asthma, respiratory problems, heart disease, or some of them are disabled. And so I think those challenges that we know are coming, it's like a wave that is coming and we have to prepare for it now. And the way we do that is by investing in a lot of these programs that oftentimes the Board of Supervisors either completely neglects or just kind of sticks their head in the sand and pretends like it's not there. But we know that by way of emergency room visits that have increased significantly, a lot of those are senior citizens that are having to go to the emergency room. Why? Because they didn't receive the medication on time that they were supposed to, or they didn't receive the nutrition. A part of a balanced diet keeps you from having high blood pressure or a diabetes incident that now prompts you to go to the emergency room. So I think investment in those safety net programs is going to be key for dealing with the explosion of residents that we've had here in the Central Valley.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's really, I think we're so hopeful, our members are, to have a candidate such as yourself, young, full of ideas, and really hope for the future, but also really in tune with the needs of your constituents. I think that really shines, Luis, in the way that you talk about those needs, your background, the challenges and opportunities that exist right now in Fresno. We really are grateful that you're able to join us. And I was also just curious for our listeners and our members, how can they support you? And, obviously as a union, I've always said that giving workers the opportunity to come together, to work together, to be able to bargain a contract around their wages and benefits, that's a very powerful opportunity. And not all workers in America or in California or in Fresno have that opportunity to have a union, but in this case, caregivers too. And I know not just caregivers, firefighters, police officers, county employees, city employees, you name it. There's plenty of organized workers in Fresno who I know are really standing up for your candidacy and believe in you. How can people support you in the work that you're doing and also your candidacy running for the Board of Supervisors?
A couple of things. I mean, I think first and foremost, let's get everybody registered to vote and make sure that they are going to be voting. I think your voice is, your voice is your vote, essentially. But just like we did the last couple of weekends, I mean, it was so, I can't tell you how encouraging it was to see over 60 people, over 60 of our SEIU brothers and sisters come out and canvass for us. The phone bankers that have been, on the lines, they call and text me and say, hey, this person would like to speak with you. I've actually walked neighborhoods where we've had phone bankers now calling into the neighborhoods I'm walking. And they were like, somebody just called about your candidacy. I was like, well, now I'm here in person in front of your door. So I think that unity of effort in really solidifying what our unions are about, and that's people power, right? We know that we're going up against very powerful interests that are funded by big agricultural, investment corporations. But at the end of the day, we have people power. And I know for a fact that that's what's going to get us over the top, that personal one-to-one contact that our SEIU brothers and sisters are doing on a daily basis. So I would encourage anybody that's listening to this podcast to sign up for the canvassing days, to sign up for the phone banking days. That's going to make a big difference in this campaign. And come November 5th, we're going to celebrate a victory, and we'll finally have somebody that actually not just has the quote unquote open door policy, because to me, that's not enough nowadays. You have to actually constantly be going out. It's my job to find out what the challenges are of the people that take care of what most vulnerable populations are. That's what I've done at the city. That's what I've done at the school board when I was elected. I pride myself, and that's one of the reasons why I have a 100% rating from our labor brothers and sisters, and they're supporting us. So that's the best way for our members to get involved, is to get out there, take the message out of change and getting our word out there. And I'm confident that we're going to be celebrating on November 5th.
There you go. Sí se puede. Yes, we can. And again, real pleasure, Luis. Thank you so much. Luis Chavez, candidate for Board of Supervisor in Fresno. So happy you were able to join. We'll see you on the campaign trail and look forward to keeping in touch. I know you have a very bright future. You're going to be doing a lot of big things in the future. So again, SEIU 2015, our members, our community, allies, we really appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Gracias.